There were moments when you asked yourself, could a small act I once did ever truly leave a mark on someone? Arya, a young woman hardened by a childhood of scarcity, stood frozen in the supermarket, pockets empty, shame rising as she realized she couldn't afford her groceries. Then, quietly, almost invisibly, a stranger stepped in and paid for her. No words, no grand gesture. He simply vanished. Years later, without knowing, Arya became his salvation. Their paths crossed again, though neither recognized the silent thread binding them. Because some things we send out into the world don't disappear. They linger, waiting for the right moment to return, often in the most extraordinary ways. And perhaps, after hearing this story, you might believe that too. Evening fell like a thin, ashen blanket, draping itself over the narrow road winding into the worn-down suburb on the outskirts of Lexington. December winds slipped through the seams of Arya Nolan's coat. Biting at her deep brown skin, she pulled her scarf tighter, her shoulders trembling not from the cold, but from an exhaustion that settled deeper than bone. Her new apartment was on the third floor of a building with no elevator. The hallway walls had long since faded, and the stairs groaned with each weary step. Her mailbox sat empty, mirroring how the city had welcomed her, silent, closed off. Arya was a trauma recovery therapist, fresh from graduation, with ideals still intact. She had left the comfort of familiarity for T-San understaffed mental health center in a struggling community where faith and emotional healing felt scarce. But that was exactly why she stayed. She had once been one of those unheard children, and now she wanted to listen. But ideals didn't pay the bills. Each month was a quiet struggle to stretch every dollar toward rent, utilities, and the endless parade of small expenses. Today was the last day before her first stipend from the center would arrive. Her bank account held a pitiful $40. At the corner grocery store, she clutched her worn cloth wallet, a penciled shopping list in her hand. Half the items were already crossed out. Almond milk, eggs, whole grain bread. All that remained were a small bag of oatmeal, discounted ripe bananas, and one bar of 85% dark chocolate. The chocolate was a splurge, but she couldn't let it go. She needed it, not for her body, but for her spirit. In a world that asked too much, the chocolate stood as a quiet rebellion, proof she could still be gentle with herself. The checkout line stretched long beneath the harsh glare of fluorescent lights, the beeping of scanners, a crying child somewhere behind her, the soft sigh of a young mother double-checking her total. All of it hummed around Arya as she waited. When it was finally her turn, she lowered her head and placed each item carefully on the conveyor belt as though they might break. She thought she had done the math, but when the screen flashed $13.21, something cold and sharp threaded down her spine. She reached into her wallet again, pulling out every last coin. They clinked softly in her palm, each sound magnified in her ears. It wasn't enough. "I'm sorry," she whispered, cheeks flushing with heat. "I'll put this last one back." "No need. I've got it." The voice came from behind her, deep, quiet, free of pity. Arya turned. A tall man stood there wrapped in a faded navy coat, his lower face hidden behind a scarf, but his eyes gave everything away. There was sorrow there, but also a kind of peace, as though he had weathered something heavier and remained upright. "You know, that's okay. I can," she stammered. He smiled gently. "Stay kind. The world needs more of that." And just like that, before she could say another word, he was gone, a whisper in the cold. Arya's hands tightened around her now empty wallet. The last item, the chocolate, had already been scanned and tucked into a brown paper bag. Outside, under the weak yellow glow of a street lamp, she stood motionless, shame mixed strangely with something else, something softer. She felt seen all the way home. The paper bag rustled quietly with each step. She unlocked her door, set the bag on the table, and sank onto the floor. She left the lights off. Through the window, the city lights blurred behind a veil of winter breath. Arya exhaled slowly. "Just get through today," she murmured, Tomorrow can wait. Outside, the wind whispered through bare branches. In that silent room, she learned her first lesson in this new city. Kindness could arrive quietly. But once it did, it echoed for a long, long time. And somehow, deep inside her, that empty wallet felt full again, just not with what she expected. The night sky hung thick as ink, pressing down on the quiet streets. Christmas lights blinked weakly from window panes. But even their soft glow couldn't warm the cold seeping into people's hearts. Snow had yet to fall, but the wind was already cruel, driving the city's homeless deeper into the shadows. Arya hurried home, clutching the brown paper bag tightly to her chest. Her face stung raw by the icy gusts. The slap of her rubber-soled shoes echoed against the pavement. The city didn't buzz after dark the way others did. Its quiet was different, the kind that forced you to face yourself. Inside her small apartment, she dropped the bag onto the table and flicked on the kettle. The kitchen offered little comfort. Just an old electric pot, a few bags of peppermint tea, and a chipped ceramic mug. Steam rose gently, fogging the window and softening the pale glow of the streetlights outside. She pulled out the chocolate bar, holding it for a long while without unwrapping it. A faint sweetness lingered in the air. And then, from some hidden corner of memory, a scene surfaced. Small hands digging into her mother's coat pocket, counting coins to buy a single piece of candy, smiling despite knowing dinner would be little more than thin porridge. Arya closed her eyes. That feeling had never truly left her. No matter how grown she became, no matter how many degrees she earned or titles she held. Standing at the checkout today, watching the screen flash $13.21 while her wallet held only $12.47, it wasn't the math that undid her. It was memory, that familiar shame, the hollow ache of not being able to afford even the simplest things. She had intended to apologize, to quietly leave the chocolate behind, but she couldn't. Not because of the price, but because of what it symbolized. That she wasn't enough, not smart enough, not successful enough, not enough. And then his voice broke through. No worries. I've got it. She remembered every word, how they fell like a soft blanket over her raw embarrassment. She remembered his eyes sad, steady, the way he didn't wait for thanks, didn't expect anything. Kindness, it seemed, was just something he did. She had simply wandered into that moment. Later, curled on her side in bed, Arya stared up at the cracked ceiling, thin blanket barely keeping the chill away. She still held the receipt, torn at the end like her pride. There was a blank space where the final amount should have been. He'd swiped his card too fast. She hadn't dared to look at him for long. Instead, she clung to the bag like it might hold back everything threatening to spill over. Now in the quiet, she let herself cry. Not then, but now. Not loudly, not in heaving sobs. Just quietly, tears slipping out as though from a well long ignored. Perhaps it was because, for the first time in months, someone had been kind without expecting anything in return. Not because of work, not because of obligation, just because.